Brazil's oil countdown, the 2029 pre-salt dilemma. Imagine this. Every day, more than 80% of Brazilian oil gushes from the gigantic pre-salt reserves, filling public coffers with billions in wealth. It's the peak of our oil production. But there's a shadow on the horizon. In 2029, something dramatic will happen. Pre-salt production will begin to decline, entering an inevitable downward trend, the so-called depletion. And this could mark the end of the golden era of Brazilian oil. If you're already complaining about gas prices today, brace yourself for the shock when half of our oil will need to be imported. This isn't speculation. It's a real scenario we'll face if we don't find a solution. And the most fascinating part? That solution already exists. A massive oil reserve on Brazil's northern coast, affectionately nicknamed the new pre-salt, due to its extraordinary potential. To understand the treasure we're talking about, just look at our neighbor Suriname, which already explores the same geological formation. In just a few years, they've transformed into one of the most prosperous countries in South America. So, what's the problem? We're in Brazil, land of endless bureaucratic obstacles and never-ending discussions. And this leads me to the crucial question. Will 2029 be the year we finally become a global energy power or the beginning of our collapse? We're facing one of the greatest environmental disputes in Brazilian history, in a race against time that will directly affect your wallet in the coming years. Brazil has a serious problem with its oil, and you need to understand why. Have you heard of the Campos Basin? It's one of Brazil's largest oil-producing regions. The problem is that the oil there is considered heavy. As scientist Sergio Sacani explains, it looks like asphalt. Transforming this thick substance into gasoline is an extremely expensive process. Now imagine that yellowish clean gasoline you put in your car. To reach that state, oil needs to be of good quality and undergo a sophisticated refining process. The use of oil directly depends on its quality and refinement. And here comes another problem. Brazil simply can't do this with its own oil. The solution seems obvious, doesn't it? Build refineries specialized in heavy oil. And Brazil even tried. The Abreu e Lima refinery in northeastern Brazil was specifically designed for this purpose. But here's the crucial detail. The part intended for heavy oil refining was never completed. It's the perfect portrait of how major projects can derail here. What began as a $2 billion investment has already swallowed more than $20 billion, and it's still incomplete. Today, it operates at only half capacity, processing a mere 88,000 barrels daily. Petrobras decided to resume construction, but the story gets even more surreal. In 2006, in a decision that seemed logical at first glance, Brazil bought a refinery in Pasadena, United States. The reasoning was simple. Building a refinery is extremely expensive, so why not buy one that's ready? But as usual, we managed to transform this into an epic waste. Our state-owned company paid nearly $2 billion more than it was worth for a facility so rusted that the employees themselves affectionately nicknamed it Little Redhead. A subsequent audit discovered that 22 people were responsible for this financial fiasco, which became one of the biggest losses in the company's history. And so we arrive at this absurd cycle. We export our crude oil at one price, only to import much more expensive gasoline later. We sell heavy oil and buy light oil to fuel our cars. It's an intricate game of international agreements that makes the final price almost impossible for the average Brazilian to understand. This bizarre system transforms Brazil, one of the world's largest oil producers, into a hostage of the international market. But in 2006, a light appeared at the end of the tunnel, one of the most impressive discoveries in world oil history, the pre-salt. The pre-salt is an area of oil reserves hidden beneath a deep layer of salt rock, formed approximately 100 million years ago from the decomposition of organic materials. We're talking about gigantic treasures buried between 5,000 and 7,000 meters below sea level, under a salt layer that can reach 2,000 meters in thickness. And here's the most interesting part. The oil found there is considered light, completely different from the heavy oil we were used to extracting. This means it's easier to refine and much more valuable in the international market. But extracting this oil is an unprecedented technological challenge. Imagine drilling through a salt layer that behaves like plastic due to high temperature and pressure. The salt literally flows, potentially closing the drilling path. And even after overcoming this barrier, the equipment must deal with a thermal roller coaster. The oil comes out at 140 degrees Celsius and quickly plummets to 4 degrees as it passes through the ducts on the seabed. This abrupt drop forms a paraffin that can clog the entire system. Despite all these obstacles, the return is astronomical. In the Buzios field in the Santos Basin, 1 billion barrels of oil were produced in just 6 years after the extraction of the first oil. After 15 years since the beginning of operations, the pre-salt now accounts for 80% of Petrobras's production and for more than 1/3 of all Latin American production. Brazil is experiencing its peak in oil production. In 2029, we'll produce 5.4 million barrels per day, so much oil that it will place us among the 10 largest producers in the world. We're already the 9th largest producer and global exporter. But what comes after 2029? The decline. And here's a curious detail. Even while producing so much, we still need to import oil. Not because of a lack of quantity, but because we need to mix different types of oil in our refineries. It's like baking a cake. You need various ingredients. You can't use just flour. From January to May 2024, we sold $25.9 billion in oil and bought $10.5 billion from other countries. And here's the big problem. If we don't discover new reserves quickly, this story could turn upside down. In the next decade, we could go from seller to buyer of oil, and that means one thing: even more expensive gasoline at your local station. But who's primarily responsible for this situation? And is there any way out? 2029. Mark that year in red on your calendar. That's when the pre-salt will begin its inevitable decline. This isn't theory or alarmism, it's a geological fact. Every oil field has a natural curve. It starts producing, reaches a peak, and then begins to fall. Experts call this the depletion curve. Here's the truly concerning part. If we don't start producing in new fields before this decline, we'll face the dreaded production gap. The result? We'll have to import half of the oil we consume from 2040 onward. If you already think gasoline is expensive at $6, imagine it at $10 or $15 or even $20. In Brazil, we're extremely dependent on the dollar for gasoline, food, and much more. If you don't organize yourself financially and protect your assets, you could face serious problems in the future. In January 2024, the dollar was worth $4.91, but at the end of the previous year, it reached $6.26. Among the 20 main currencies in the world, the real was the one that depreciated the most in 2024. Now, at the beginning of 2025, with the dollar falling, it's time to start organizing yourself financially. But there is hope. On Brazil's northern coast, in front of the state of Amapá, there's an area that could completely change this scenario, the Equatorial Margin. And we're not talking about small reserves. It's one of the largest oil treasures in history, already considered the new pre-salt. To get an idea of the potential, just look at what happened to our neighbors who already explore this region. French Guiana saw its GDP soar by more than 60% in a single year. Suriname, in just a few years, has transformed into one of the richest countries in South America. It's an economic revolution without precedent. Petrobras isn't sitting idly by. It already has 16 wells planned for this new exploratory frontier. But here's the problem. The exploration of this area is stuck in a stalemate between Petrobras and IBAMA, Brazil's environmental agency. The reason? The region has complex tides and marine currents that increase the risk of accidents. Additionally, nearby is the Amazon River mouth, a sensitive ecosystem. Of the 16 planned wells, Petrobras has only received authorization to drill 2, and far from the most promising area. To try to resolve this impasse, Petrobras presented a robust plan, $3 billion in investments in this region over the next 5 years and the drilling of 15 wells. According to the company, this will allow us to contribute to meeting the growing demand for energy with technological investments that ensure operational safety and environmental care. Additionally, the company has developed various environmental projects, protection of migratory birds, conservation of mangroves, and social programs that would benefit more than 7,600 people in local communities. Another controversial point is the supposed corals at the mouth of the Amazon. Petrobras claims that there's a scientific misconception being propagated. There are no corals in this region, only rock formations that resemble corals. And here's an important detail that few mention. The planned wells wouldn't even be near the river mouth. They would be 540 kilometers away, in an area that already has intense ship traffic. We're not trying to drill in an untouched marine sanctuary, argues Petrobras's Director of Exploration and Production, challenging the narrative that the exploration would threaten a virgin ecosystem. Meanwhile, IBAMA's representatives closely monitor the situation. It's no small matter. If exploration is approved, the state could become the richest in Brazil thanks to oil royalties. But while this impasse continues, time is running against us. Ideally, new production would begin before the pre-salt decline, creating a smooth transition. As Sergio Saccani explains, if you don't start producing here in the Equatorial Margin, there will be a hole in production. And that hole means we'll buy a lot of oil from abroad. And then, yes, your gasoline goes up and by a lot. It's a race against time that will define not only Brazil's energy future, but also how much you'll pay to fuel your car in the coming years. The big question is, will Brazil seize this opportunity to become a world power? According to Hunter Farris, ExxonMobil's senior vice president of deep waters, Brazil has a privileged position, exceptional professionals, and extraordinary potential with the Equatorial Margin. 55% to 60% of the global energy matrix comes from oil and gas today, which are essential for improving people's quality of life, requiring new discoveries and technologies, says Farris. Brazil is in a unique position. We have the pre-salt producing quality energy now, one of the world's largest reserves awaiting exploration in the Equatorial Margin, and the technical knowledge to make it happen. But our biggest battle isn't technological. It's against time and bureaucracy. We need to resolve the impasse between development and preservation before the production gap becomes reality. Petrobras is using all its cards to try to convince IBAMA. In November 2024, the company delivered a new package of documents to the Environmental Agency, responding to all requirements. And it doesn't stop there. A wildlife rehabilitation center is being built in Oiapoque, scheduled for completion in March 2025. These efforts demonstrate the company's commitment to obtaining this crucial license. The 2 wells that Petrobras already has authorization to explore are on the coast of Rio Grande do Norte, far from the most controversial area. The region that really matters, the Amazon mouth basin, remains blocked. It's a gigantic area that extends from the border with French Guiana to Marajo Bay, where Block FZAM-59 is located, considered the most promising of all. The impasse between economic development and environmental preservation has never been so fierce. While Petrobras tries to prove it can safely explore the region, environmentalists maintain their opposition, fearing irreversible damage to the Amazon ecosystem. Brazil's history with oil has been a sequence of wasted opportunities and some well-utilized ones, from the rusty Pasadena refinery to the billions buried in Abreu e Lima, but with the extraordinary discovery of the pre-salt. The path to becoming an energy power exists, but it involves a delicate balance, exploring our resources responsibly, developing our refining capacity, and doing this in time to prevent the collapse of pre-salt production. The answer to these questions will determine not only whether you'll need to take out a loan to fill your tank, but whether Brazil will continue to be that country that stumbles over its own riches while watching its neighbors, who 20 years ago didn't even dream of being powers, give a lesson on how it's done. And you? What do you think about this issue? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to receive more analyses like this one.